The RCMP confirms it's looking into an ugly verbal attack on Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Video of a man shouting profanities at the minister surfaced online over the weekend.
Chrystia, yes. What are you doing in Alberta? Traitors.
Here with us is Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek. Mayor, welcome back to Power in Politics.
Thanks for having me.
So you're meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister tonight, Chrystia Freeland. I imagine the topic of harassment will come up, given what she's gone through in recent days. Your story has made the rounds on Twitter. People are very much interested in this topic. Do you think you'll raise that with her? And what are you going to ask for? What do you think needs to be done to try and tamp down on some of these public threats that politicians are facing?
I appreciate the question, and I think there's probably going to be two things. Firstly, when I do get a rare opportunity to meet with someone like the Deputy Prime Minister, one of the biggest things that I need to talk about is the crisis we've got in our downtown and how we better coordinate efforts between orders of government around community safety and well-being. So that's going to be my top priority. But to your point about how do we make things better, once again, it's going to have to be a concerted effort between municipalities, provincial and federal governments so that we're actually taking this type of behavior seriously, and we are changing legislation as needed to ensure that the voices of people who are saying this is very real are heard and that changes are addressed.
So you mentioned changing legislation. What do you think needs to be on the books? How do we kind of bring this targeted harassment, if you will, to a stop?
Well, one of the things that I struggle with is when it comes to harassment or it comes to certain types of things that happen that are not considered crimes necessarily, you have to demonstrate as a so-called victim that you found it to be intimidation or threatening or frightening, and that you're fearful because of what has happened. And that's definitely rooted in the feelings and the emotion of the thing that's happened. What I'd prefer to see is things in legislation, things in the criminal code that say you simply cannot take these actions. So make the action identifiable. You cannot protest in front of a public official's home rather than how did that person feel? So I'm a little concerned that we've leaned too heavily on the victim to carry the burden.
And it does seem like online is a cesspool right now, right? I mean, I'm sure your Twitter feed is just littered with hate and nonsense. I know that mine is. Do you think that there is something to be said for the federal government's plan to introduce some sort of online hate legislation? Perhaps you've mentioned physical threats, things that can materialize in person, but what about online? Is there something to be done digitally?
I think we need to look at the whole environment. I think we need to look digitally. We need to be looking at what's happening in person. I think we need to ensure that we are actually recognizing verbal assault for what it is instead of minimizing it as, free speech and the ability to say what you want to. And this concept that, once again, I go back to this idea of how did the victim feel? Well, there's a lot of standers by that heard a lot of these things. How do they feel? What do they think this is? So I think it's a combination of understanding that we've got to do a better job of rooting out organized hate groups and then putting in some sort of process by which to press charges.
So I think, this is not new. I feel like we have talked about this before. The Prime Minister has faced threats and hate. Jagmeet Singh, the federal NDP leader, has as well. And there's really decades of this sort of thing going on. But do you think that what had happened to Chrystia Freeland, you coming public with your story, do you think that that's changed the conversation, that there actually might be an impetus now to actually get something done?
I would really hope so. I mean, I've got 3 years left in my mandate to make sure that I continue pushing this forward. I would say that we needed to listen to the voices of female journalists, people of color who have been saying for quite some time that things have ratcheted up and gotten more violent. So, if we don't want to listen to journalists, maybe you want to listen to journalists and politicians, because we're all telling you it's bad. Something needs to happen. And I'm calling on the federal and provincial governments to work with each other to make sure that we can put an end to this type of behavior.
The Prime Minister was asked about this today at a press conference here in Ontario, and he said he thinks a lot of this is being driven by COVID. people have been isolated, people have not been socializing the way they normally do, that there is a real mental health and addictions crisis in this country. Do you think that's partly to blame for what we're seeing here?
I would say my perspective might be a little bit different. I think COVID gave people who were promoting hate the opportunity to capitalize on others' vulnerabilities as they were isolated. So, I agree with the comment that people were in isolation, they became desolate, they became desperate for some sense of community. And I think that's when these organized hate groups really went in and said, come with us. We'll give you people to hang out with. We'll give you a sense of purpose and belonging. And it's unfortunately a very tragic sense of belonging that doesn't really make a lot of sense to a rational-minded person. But it's allowed to perpetuate, and these are the things that we need to root out, and we need to call it what it is. It's organized hate, and we need to be able to address it.
It's organized hate, and I think that's what makes it so difficult, because it's hard to stamp it out, isn't it? I mean, we talked about legislation. Maybe there's room for more police action. Do you think, though, that we're at this sad point where whatever we do might not really work? Like, are we prepared for that as a country? Like, is there really anything we can do that will stop people from just being bad people?
People being bad people is one thing, but coordinated efforts to attack people, whether it's physically or verbally, it's this whole undercurrent of putting out threats in order to instill fear, to get good people to stop doing good work. And we won't stand for that. I mean, as I said, talking about fear doesn't make you weak. Talking about fear gives you the opportunity to explain what happens when we allow things like this to propagate. So if we can talk about fear and understand that people who are relaying their experiences are not living in fear, they're living with fear. They've packaged it away and they continue to do their jobs. But let's take this stuff seriously. It's not just a random word that was thrown out. The people that came to my home didn't just randomly show up. This was an organized effort.
I think one thing that people might be shocked about is how little police protection there really are for politicians in this country. I mean, at the federal level, there's actually very little for cabinet ministers unless they have been targeted in the past. At the provincial level, as far as I know, at every province other than Quebec, there really isn't much protection for cabinet ministers. I'm not really sure what you have available to you at the municipal level, but do you think we need to beef that up a bit? Is that one solution? Maybe we do need more police protecting our politicians.
I think the one message that you will get loud and clear from the police is that they need to be able to press charges and know that there will be prosecution. The police are equally frustrated. I can give you many examples of hate crimes that have gone on in the city, what we would classify as a hate crime, what the police would as well. And it simply can't meet the threshold that's needed for prosecution. So I think the criminal justice system is flawed, and the expectation that the police can fix everything, they can't. They have told us many times that the law needs to be stronger, and we need to be more realistic in terms of our contemporary environment and what's happening, and fix a dated system so that they can do their job.
You've been through such a harrowing experience, and I really can't imagine what it's been like for you. How do you find the strength, really, to carry on every day when there's the possibility of this sort of thing being sent your way?
It's not just me. This is happening to a lot of people. Some of my colleagues on council have gone through things like this. Most women who are in elected positions have gone through things like this. So, my purpose is not to simply call out my own examples and look for some sympathy. I'm using my platform to say that this is happening and it needs to be taken seriously. All of those women journalists who came forward and said, we're not being heard, I stand with them. We need to do something about this. And, we do what we do. We take the fear, we take the experience, we put it in a box and we put it away for another day. And we keep going and doing the things we have to do, because you can't stop. There's too much that needs to be done.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.